Today we will be talking about organizational effectiveness. So, according to Merriam-Webster, effectiveness is the power to produce a desired result. But in any organizational context, effectiveness is something that is really, really hard to define. Why? Because let's take an example of Apple, right? So Apple is considered a very successful organization if we, consider different measures. But if we ask the question, is it also effective? We don't know because the effectiveness of any organization depends on various factors. It can be its missions, its goals, its internal efficiency, strategic positioning, and many more factors. So, if we take examples of, let's say, three companies, company A is basically a privately owned tech company with 30 million users, owned by a few renowned venture capital firms, and is valued, let's say, at 5 billion, and it has almost about 100 people. And then we take an example of another company. Let's say it is a non-profit organization and it is employing over 1,200 employees, right? And it basically uses products and makes products that are recycled, and they're turning them into a durable product. And now let's take the example of a third company. Let's say that it's a worldwide fund for nature, employs around 6,000 employees, and is basically leading organization when it comes to wildlife conservation. So, what do you think? Which one of these companies is an effective company? Any guesses? Well, the answer is that all of them are effective. Why? Because they're effective in different ways. When it comes to effectiveness, all these organizations, in one way or the other, are making tangible positive impacts, or they're making any they're giving profits to their shareholders, or to the users, or to the workers, or to the environment, right? So whenever a company makes a positive impact, that means that it is an effective company. It doesn't matter how many employees it has. It doesn't matter if it is a non-profit or if it's a venture capital. Any company can be effective, and in any way, and there are very different ways to actually measure the effectiveness of any company. So this whole thing brings us to the organizational context of organizational effectiveness. So this shows basically that organizational effectiveness has no one definition, and it completely depends upon organizational context. So it can revolve around a degree to which a company accomplishes its goals, satisfies its stakeholders, has the resources it needs to operate, or even create societal or environmental impact, right? So this brings us to the definition of organizational effectiveness. So organizational effectiveness can be defined as the degree to which an organization achieves its goals that it's set out to achieve. And those goals can be it can be a certain output that is related to productivity, or your service quality. It can be efficiency goals that it has set out for itself. And it can also be the degree to which its internal processes are aligned, because when it comes to organization, that is something that is really, really important. And maybe an organizational effectiveness for a certain company can be that. And it can also be the degree to which it has secured its resources, that is that it requires to create a competitive advantage. So this brings us to organizational effectiveness, that organizational effectiveness can be anything. It is basically a degree to which an organization achieves its goal that it has set out to achieve for itself. And it can be in any way. It can be an output, it can be related to efficiency, it can be related to internal processes, and it can also be related to resources that helps the company secure. How do organizations become effective? organization can become effective in, I believe, 6 ways. By improving their business processes, second, by enhancing the employee relationship, by building their worker skills, by improving their employee experience, by aligning the business functions with the organizational strategy, and by creating the right employee culture and behavior. So, if we talk about organization effectiveness, now if we look at point number one, that is improving business processes. Obviously, when you improve any business process, that can make an organization effective. How? Better and efficient processes obviously result in decreased costs. They result in faster turnarounds. They also result in greater process ROIs, right? So all these things end up making an organization effective. Now, if you look at point number two, that is enhancing employee relationships. So employee relationships are basically a key determiner of any successful business operation, right? When employee relationships are good, that means a business operations are working well, right? However, decrease in interpersonal conflicts, and improving teamwork can enhance all the results across the organization, right? So obviously, when there are lesser conflicts and when there's more teamwork, this will obviously result in better results, leading to an organization being more effective. Now, if you look at point number three, that is building worker skills. So the right skills are very necessary for any employee to function effectively, right? And especially in today's environment, that is very, very true when it comes to all the digital skills being widened, and there's like a huge skill gap, and there's like a very, very huge need for digital literacy. That is something that any organization needs to work on, that they need to build the skills of their work in order to maintain their effectiveness in the long term, because the digital literacy is very, very important when it comes to organization these days. So if any organization wishes to be effective, they need to make sure that the employees and the workers that are working for them are basically adopting these new skills and are becoming digital literate, right? Okay, now coming to point number four, that is improving the employee experience. So one way to increase basically employee productivity is to improve their experience, right? Because if your employees are having a good time, if they feel like if the whole experience becomes really, really nice for them, their productivity is automatically going to increase. And if their productivity increase, that is obviously going to lead to organizational effectiveness as well, right? Because when it comes to better worker experiences, they can lead to work satisfaction, right? They can lead to more work output. That can also lead to employees being motivated, so which will obviously improve the effectiveness of the organization. So that is something that is really, really important if you want to improve your organization's effectiveness. It is important to improve the experience of the employees in your company. Now, number fifth one would be aligning business functions with organizational strategy. So we all know that when it comes to misaligned business functions, they can lead to achievement of goals that are basically out of sync with the main goals of the company, right? And that approach would be like ineffective, and that would lead to the resources going to waste. So it is very important, in order for any organization to become effective, that is they need to align their business functions with the organizational strategy. So all the business functions need to come together and work as a whole to achieve that organizational strategy, if an organization wants to be effective. Last but not least, creating the right employee culture and behavior. So any culture of the company basically determines and defines what the people believes and what their values are, right? So when it comes to corporate culture, they basically attract certain types of talent, certain types of attitude and mindsets, right? So any right culture can basically improve the efficiency and effectiveness by improving the behavior of the organization, right? Because whatever culture that you provide to your employees, that is how they will be working. So, if you want to promote effectiveness in an organization, you need to cultivate a culture that actually promotes the effectiveness. And in order for that, working on the right culture is very important, and promoting the right behaviors and for the employees is very important in order for any organization to be effective. So this is it when it comes to how an organization can become effective. These are the 6 ways that companies can work on and become more effective. So now we will be talking about the factors that basically affect any organization's effectiveness. Namely, there are basically 3 factors, or we can call them 3 variables that affect the organization's effectiveness. One is causal variables, the second one is intervening variables, and the third one is end result variables. So if we start from the causal variables, what exactly are causal variables? Causal variables are those independent variables that basically determine the course of developments in any organization and the objectives which are achieved by those organizations, right? The causal variables can actually include only those independent variables that can actually be altered by the organization or by the management of the organization, right? So these can include any policies, any decisions, any business and leadership strategies, any skills or behaviors that the organization or its management can actually change, work upon, because it's an independent variable, so obviously it is not affected by any other variable. It is free from all the other factors that are happening in the organization, and these are basically the variables that affect the other variables, right? So all the policies that are made in the company or any decisions that are made in the company, they are the ones affecting the other factors within the organization. So these are the independent variables, and they can be altered by the management or the organization if they want to, right? Then we have intervening variables. So what exactly are intervening variables? Intervening variables are those variables that basically reflect the internal state or the health of the organization, right? So in the examples we can talk about employee loyalties or employee attitudes and motivations, performance goals, and perceptions of all the members, and whatever their collective capacity is, or the communication that happens within the organization, or the decision making. So these are all the variables that basically affect, and they basically showcase how good the organization is internally, how healthy the organization is, right? The third one is basically the end result variables. These are the variables that are basically dependent, right? Just like the causal variables, which were independent, these are dependent ones, right? And they basically reflect the achievements of the organization. These are dependent on the independent variables, right? So these are basically the productivity, the costs, the loss and earnings, basically where the company stands when it comes to them achieving their goals. So these are the variables or the factors that basically represent where the company stands, or what the achievements of the company are. So basically these are the factors that basically affect the organization's effectiveness. Method for achieving organizational effectiveness. In order to achieve organizational effectiveness, the whole method can be broken down into 5 steps, right? The first step being, when you choose the organizational effectiveness model, the models that we discussed previously, which include the goal approach, or the resource based approach, or the constituency approach. So we need to choose which organizational effectiveness model we want to apply to our organization. Then we need to analyze the components of these model, or the model that we've chosen, right? Now, according to that, we need to develop the change management strategies that we want to basically implement to improve all the elements within the organization. And then obviously, once we've developed the change management strategies, we need to execute them and manage how we're supposed to manage our change of plans, obviously, since we're trying to bring about a change. So we need to manage that as well. And once we've executed, what we need to do is that we need to review and adjust it continuously, in order to basically improve it, and we need to adjust it as it's necessary. So if we get deeper into it, the first step that we talked about, choosing an organizational effectiveness model, this is like the very very first step when it comes to you want to bring any successful improvement. So this is the first step. Unless you understand how to basically view organizational success, you won't be able to develop proper goals or processes. So that is something that is very important, that you need to understand how you want to view your organizational success, right? And that can only be done once you choose your organizational effectiveness model accordingly, because you need to understand what effectiveness means to you as an organization, right? The second step would be analyze the components of your model, right? So what we need to do is that you need to perform assessments on each of the component of the model. Let's say if you're using goal based model, you would need to judge your business units, your processes, your employees and strategies, and then you need to discover what your weaknesses are, what your strengths are, and what are the areas where you can potentially grow. So that is how you basically analyze the whole component of the whole model. Now once you've analyzed the whole components, the third step is that you need to develop change management strategies and improve those elements, right? So basically, change management is a practice and discipline of executing organizational change. We all know that, right? So in order to achieve organizational effectiveness, regardless of your systems, it basically requires effective change management strategies as well. So that is something that we need to look into as well. Now if we talk about the fourth step, that is when it comes to executing and managing your change plans, after you've set your goals, and after you've set out a change management strategy, you just need to execute your plan accordingly, right? And just like any project, you need to ensure that you use a sophisticated structured management approach. And the results of obviously of your project will depend greatly on how well you basically apply your change project, right? So similar is the case with bringing about this change in the model. And last step is basically the review and adjust as necessary. So you need to continually review and analyze your project. You need to use your data, you need to use analytics, you need to use KPIs and metrics that can basically help you gauge the progress. And then depending upon your progress, and after determining the areas of improvement, you need to make adjustments, so that you can keep the whole organization on track, and be actually successful in whatever change that you want to bring about, or whatever effectiveness, organization effectiveness is you're trying to bring. You need to make sure that you make the adjustments accordingly, and bring about that change. So that is how basically in 5 steps that you can achieve your organizational effectiveness. That is, number one, choose an organization's effectiveness model, analyze the components of your model, develop change management strategies and improve those elements, execute and manage your change plans, and review and adjust as necessary. So these are the 5 Let's talk about how do managers measure organizational effectiveness. Because managers are responsible for utilizing organizational resources in a way that it basically maximizes organizational ability to create value. It is important to understand how they evaluate organizational performance. Control, innovation, and efficiency are basically three most important processes that managers use in order to evaluate how effectively the organization is creating value, right? So if we talk about control, control basically means having control over external environment and basically having the ability to attract resources and customers. However, when it comes to innovation, innovation means developing organizational skills and capabilities so that the organization can discover new products along with creating new organizational structures and cultures to basically help them adapt the change, right? Because in order for any organization to stay effective and competent in a market, they need to basically be innovative, and in order to be innovative they need to discover the new products, and how they can create their new organizational cultures and organization structures, so that they can bring about the change that is very necessary, depending upon which time that they're operating in. The third one is efficiency. Efficiency basically means developing modern production facilities, and by the use of new information technologies that can basically produce and distribute a company's product in a timely and cost effective manner. So in order for any organization to be effective, they also need to be efficient, right? And they can only be efficient if they have good technology, and they have modern facilities, and their production and their distribution network is like very strong, and it can be like cost effective and time effective as well, and that is how they can basically maintain their effectiveness. So when it comes to control, how can managers control, right? There's an approach called external resource approach. So this is the method through which the managers can basically evaluate how effectively an organization manages and controls its external environment, like we talked about, right? So managers can actually use indicators like their stock price, or the profitability, or the ROI, which basically they can compare with the performance of the organization, and then they can compare the performance of the other organizations as well in the same industry or in the same market, and they can basically understand how well the company is doing, in terms or in competition with their competitors, right? And it also basically involves the top management's ability to actually basically to perceive and to respond to changes of the environment, or basically to bring about any change, to initiate any change, and to be the first one to actually take an advantage of any new opportunity, or basically there can be because new opportunity is also another indicator of an organization's ability to basically influence and control its environment. So all these things the top management can basically need to look into in order to basically control their organization's effectiveness, right? Now if we talk about the second point, that is the innovation, that can be done through the internal approach, right? So this is basically a method that allows the managers to evaluate how effectively an organization functions and resources operate, right? So in order to be effective for any organization, they need a structure, they need a culture that basically fosters the adaptability, and basically they're like very quick when it comes to responding to changing conditions in the environment, right? So this basically measures an organization's capacity for innovation, right? The things that can be included in this is the length of time that is needed uh, for an organization to make a decision, or maybe the amount of time needed to basically get new products to the market, right? Or the amount of time that is spent coordinating the activities of different departments. So this can basically tell the internal approach and how effective the organization is functioning, right? And how effective the organization is bringing about change and innovation. And so this is one way that basically the managers can evaluate how effective their organization is. The third approach would be the technical approach, right? Which helps the manager evaluate the efficiency, right? So, in this method, the managers basically evaluate how efficiently an organization can convert some fixed amount of organizational resources into finished goods and services, right? This is what the efficiency is about, right? It can be basically measured in terms of productivity and efficiency. So productivity actually measures the objective indicators of the effectiveness of the organization's production operations, right? So the more productive any organization is, obviously it basically, or the more products they're producing, it basically shows that the production's operation is effective. That is exactly why they're able to produce well and convert their fixed amount of, like we talked about, organizational resources into the finished goods and services, and then have them in the market. So obviously that is also one way that the managers can gauge and understand how effective their company is. So all in all, these three approaches can help managers measure the effectiveness in terms of control, in terms of innovation, and then in terms of efficiency as well. Let's talk about the six systems of organizational effectiveness. The six systems that basically set up the conditions necessary to create a high performing organization includes leadership, communication, accountability, delivery, performance, and management. So starting off with leadership, one of the most critical steps when it comes to organizational effectiveness is developing leadership within the company, right? Why? Because leaders are very important when it comes to organizational effectiveness, as they are the ones who are creating vision for their company. They are the ones who are basically defining, refining, executing all the critical processes, and they are the ones who are basically translating the values into strategies, right? They are the ones who take actions, and they are the ones who are basically held accountable within an organization. So when it comes to being accountable, when it comes to answering, there are three things that any leader needs to make sure, and that any leader is answerable about. Number one being value. So when it comes to value, one thing that they need to answer is that what is the value that the leader is offering to the customers to basically gain a competitive advantage in the market. The second is about approach, that how is he fulfilling the unique needs of his stakeholders, and which strategy is going to support the vision of the company for achieving that competitive advantage that they want to achieve in the market, right? And the third thing is about the alignment, that is what is the designed alignment of the processes, of the practices, strategy, structure, culture, and if they will be able to create maximum conditions for achieving the vision of the company or not. So basically these are the three things that any leader is answerable for or held accountable for. Now if we come towards the communication, that is the second part of the or the second system. Every organization needs an effective communication system, so that the information flow within the company is smooth, right? And leaders can be very successful when they communicate, when they're able to communicate their message to other people in the company in a very precise manner. And everything that happens in a company is basically because of the exchange of information, right? Because any employee works in a certain way, or work towards something only when it is communicated to them, or only when they receive that information that this is what they're supposed to do. So that is exactly why strategic communication is considered a critical element when it comes to the success of the chain, right? Now, when it comes to communication, it's basically makes sure that the impact of the message that is in alignment with the intentions, so that it will lead to a better and like a complete understanding by the rest of the employees within the organization. It should answer what, where, when, how, everything. All these things basically matter. Why? Because you need to keep a track of your words and communicate effectively. An essential way for organization effectiveness is basically by making sure that the leader is aligning with the people around him and basically teaching them regularly all the things that they need to know. This is why basically this is basically called the transparent communication strategy, and this will help keep the focus on a common cause. This is something that minimizes the uncertainty. This is something that prevented excuses, and gives weight to the decisions of the leadership to shape the behavior and belief of the employees, right? So when it comes to bringing about change, when it comes to organizational effectiveness, communication is very critical, because this is what brings all the employees and all the people within the organization on the same page. Now, if we talk about accountability, organizational effectiveness is basically to a very great extent depending upon the concept of accountability as well, right? Any company, if they wish to be effective or if they wish to be successful, they should build an environment where every individual, whether it's an individual, whether it's a group, whether it's a team, they should be held accountable for the tasks that they participate in, right? Because it is basically that accountability that determines how effectively the people in the organization are performing their functions, right? And it is very important for the organization to also make sure that the performance accountability system is in place, so that they can clarify the expectations of the company and align the rewards as well as the consequences with the actual accomplishments. So as long as the employees are not held accountable, as long as the performance of the accountability system is not in place, then the employees will never be clear about what is expected of them, and what is it that they are required to achieve. It is only possible when the system of accountability is in place, and when the expectations are clearly communicated to them, so that they are actually able to accomplish what is required for them to accomplish. Now, talking about the delivery, right? So when it comes to the delivery efficiency strategy, that is the next step when it comes to the 6 systems of the organizational effectiveness. And it is basically deals with the delivery of the products and services. It is a fact that consumers in markets are ever changing, and this obviously means that a company should always be prepared to shift and make adjustments to basically accommodate these changes, as well as the changes that are caused by the advancements of the technology, because we all know that every day a new technology comes, and it is very important for the organization to actually change and adapt according to that change, right? So a straightforward delivery process will basically ensure that the delivery is made to the right customers, and that the customers are engaged to their fullest. That is why all the business entities, they basically try to create simple procedures that are adaptable and also responsive, because it is very important for all the delivery based processes to be responsive. When it comes to delivery, there's basically no scope for complexity, because when it comes to satisfying the customer experience, you can't make it complex. You need to make it as simple as it can be, right? And obviously, when organizations basically align the initiative and operations with strategy using the best technique, they can actually pursue the breakthroughs in critical areas and actually be able to build future capability as well. So that is one thing that the 6 strategies also focuses on. Now coming to performance, right? So when it comes to performance, one thing that comes into our mind is human resources. And if we talk about human resources is basically the most valuable asset of a company. And that is why, there's like a very, very proper emphasis given to hiring and retaining the best of the best employees, right? Because it is the people within the organization that make any organization effective or successful, or whatever it is that you need your organization to be. So it is very essential and very important to actually find the right fit for the job, right? And basically develop their skills and know how through their training and other learning methods, so that organizational effectiveness can be achieved and can be increased. Business entities are particular about rewarding knowledge, talent, and expertise to actually boost employee performances, so that they can ultimately have a positive impact of the organizational effectiveness. Because if you want any organization to be effective, you need its people to be developed to their fullest and deliver to their fullest. So in order for that, you need to reward them. You need to reward their exceptional performance, you need to reward their knowledge and their talent and their expertise, so they feel motivated, and they're motivated enough to actually perform better and lead towards that organizational effectiveness that any company wants for itself. Now coming to measurement. So it is basically imperative to measure organizational effectiveness. A business entity needs to have a standard set of metrics, or develop a system that basically has reviews, or any parameters that they need to analyze and basically measure the tasks and projects and productivity and behavior, process and results. Why? Because obviously if you do not measure, you will never know how effective your organization is. You will never be able to compare it with other companies in the market, and you will never be able to understand how well your company is doing. So also it is the leaders who basically establish and maintain the measurement system. So they're able to track the progress of the company and review the status regularly, in order to make any improvements if it is required, and to make any company more and more effective every day. They need to basically have a regular check on whatever the progress that the company is making, and inculcate whatever it is needed in order for the organization to become effective. Okay, now we will be talking about organizational effectiveness models. So, there are various models that are used for organizational effectiveness, namely goal model, internal processes model, resource-based model, strategic constituency model, stakeholder model, competing values model, and abundance model. So I will start explaining it from the goal model. So basically what happens is that in goal approach, it basically gauges effectiveness by measuring to what degree the organization reaches the goals it is set out to achieve, right? And it is basically the most traditional way of measuring organizational effectiveness. The goals can basically include product or service quality and quantity. It can be financial goals, it can be shareholder value, societal impact, or it can also be all of these, right? So, the goal approach is basically an approach which is less actionable, but it measures the output. And it does not provide information about the input or the processes. And this is the first approach that we call the goal approach. Now, coming to the second approach, which is the internal process model. So, when it comes to internal process model, it does not look at the outcome, but what actually happens within an organization. This approach is used to basically assess the effectiveness through the functioning of an organization, right? How the operations of an organization actually function. And it can be achieved through information management. It can be achieved from documentation and the continuous consolidation as well. The best known example is basically for this would be lean process. It is basically focused on continuous improvement and efficiency. But when it comes to drawback of the internal process model, there's one drawback, that is, it focuses more on efficiency rather than effectiveness. And that is why the focus of this whole approach is more towards the inward processes of the organization, and it focuses less on the outward opportunities, which obviously is not a great thing, because for any business, in order to be effective, they also need to consider the outward opportunities that they present. So when it comes to this approach, that this is one big drawback, because it only focuses on the internal processes of the company, and how they can improve those internal processes, and how they're doing about the internal processes, but it completely ignores the outside approach and the outward perspective of the company. Now coming to the third one, that is the resource based model. So when it comes to the resource based model, it basically looks at the input as a measure of effectiveness. So according to the resource based models, what happens is that firms achieve a competitive advantage by exploiting the resources that are valuable, that are rare, and that are basically hard to imitate or copy, right? Because for any company to have a competitive advantage, they need to have these resources that the other companies cannot either find. They're either scarce, or they're really really hard to copy. So if we take a few examples of such resources, then it can be a proprietary software like Instagram or Microsoft Windows, because it has advanced technology. And if we talk about the example of Apple, then it is like a very advanced company when it comes to technology, and it also has a very very strong brand name, right? So when it comes to other companies, things like these become really really hard to copy, and it obviously ends up giving the company a huge advantage, right? Because when it comes to Apple, they have the technology which is combined with the strong brand image as well, right? So these organizations, they basically become very very effective because they are able to secure the supply of these resources, right? They're able to get their hands onto the resources which other companies or their other competitors are not able to get, and that is why they end up being very very effective, right? The fourth model would be strategic constituency model. Okay, so when it comes to this model basically assesses the effectiveness by measuring the degree to which it satisfies the ones who are in the environment, who can basically threaten the organization's survival. Basically, if we talk about them, these can be the stakeholders, these can be the owners, the management, the customers, the employees, the suppliers, all these people who basically are very very important, are like are key to an organization either working, either surviving, or just simply crashing down, right? So it is very important to make sure that any organization, in order to be effective, they basically safeguard their interest, right? Because only and only when they're able to safeguard the interest of these people, that is when they're actually able to survive in the market, right? So each constituency basically has a degree of power, and they have different goals. So it needs to be like for any company, in order to be effective, needs to identify the relevant strategic constituencies, and then identify their expectations and how they can actually meet their expectations, and only then they will be able to be an effective organization, right? Now another approach is basically the stakeholder approach. So just like constituencies, it is also basically linked to it, and it also includes the strategic constituencies. Why? Because they are the ones who are indirectly affected by the organization, but they might not even have the power, right? So let's say when we talk about stakeholders, it can be the families of the workers who are working there, or the activists, or the communities, right, in which the company is operating. So these are the people who might not be directly affected by the organization, but they can be indirectly or affected. So in order for any company to be effective when it comes to stakeholder approach, they basically consider the effect on these people as well in order to be effective, right? Then we have competing values model. So this is basically based on Cameron and Quinn's competing values framework, And this approach basically measures effectiveness by the ability of an organization to simultaneously promote competing values. Now, how I'm going to explain this is that, let's say an organization may want to satisfy its customers, and they want to maximize their profits, but they also at the same time wants to take care of their employees, right? They want to promote internal structure and coordination, while they also want to promote innovation and novel initiatives, right? And they want to have like maybe like a clear direction, while they also want to provide autonomy to their people and help the organization get there. So in order for an organization to be effective, the ability through which the organization is able to reconcile these competing values is basically key to being an effective organization, right? So obviously these are the things that are they compete with each other, either the customers and the employees, if they want to take care of both, so they need to go hand in hand, right? So in order for an organization to be effective, these competing values needs to be taken care of as well. And that is another approach through which we can judge an organization's effectiveness. The last model that I will be talking about is the abundance model. So, in the abundance model, it basically proposes that effectiveness equates to unleashing the highest potential of human systems, right? This is basically about bringing forward positive values, virtuousness. This is basically in order to do anything effectively, there has to be a balance between all the negative and the positive values, right? That is very, very important. If any of these values take over the other one, then you'll never be able to strike a balance. And in order to be effective, you need to strike a balance between the negative and the positive values, right? So if we take an example like excellence and flourishing cannot at all exist without challenges and struggles, right? But challenges and struggles, if you look at it, it's a negative element, but at the same time, if you flourish, if you excel, that is a positive element. So both positive and negative elements and emotions are required to push the potential of human systems, right? They're basically required to make an organization very, very effective. So that is another model through which that we can judge the effectiveness of an organization. That is, if their negatives and the positives go hand in hand, and neither of the two basically outrun the other one. So that is about the models and how organizational effectiveness can be judged and measured in when it comes to organizations. Contribution of HR to organizational effectiveness. First, organizational effectiveness is basically the main focus of organizational development unit, which is often the part of HR, right? So obviously, in one way or another, organizational effectiveness is linked to HR, and HR obviously does contribute to organizational effectiveness as well. The organizational development team basically runs organizational transformations and comes up with, specific interventions for workforce and organizational issues. For example, high turnover may result in interventions aimed to reduce turnover, obviously, right? And to ensure continuity of business and drive efficiencies. So basically, that is the first thing that the HR focuses on. Also, in the second manner, the basically HR can contribute to organizational effectiveness through people's processes and building workforce capabilities. So let's just get into detail and see how HR can basically help in organizational effectiveness. So if we talk about people practices, these are basically the core HR practices, which basically include recruitment, selection, learning and development, rewards and recognition, performance management, workforce planning. All of these basically practices are aimed to create workforce capabilities, right? Because after these activities are performed, that is when a workforce is created, and a workforce capability can be created, right? So if we talk about workforce capabilities, these are basically the capabilities that HR is building in the workforce, right? For example, they want the employees to be engaged. So there's employee engagement, then there's employee experience, and there can be leadership, there can be inclusion. So most oftenly people practices are directly aimed at building these capabilities. So basically we send the employees to training, so their capabilities can increase, and then we reward them fairly, so that they feel motivated, and they perform well. And then we have leadership development programs as well, to basically increase our managers leadership capabilities as well. So all these activities that HR performs is basically in order to make their workforce more capable, and to enhance their capabilities, right? Now, which basically leads to the key performance drivers. So when it comes to organizational effectiveness, you will recognize, and that you need to recognize the key performance drivers, and these drivers basically include number one, unique resources and capabilities, right? So in the resource based model earlier, we did talk about that HR should basically actively help to build resources and capabilities that are short of value, and that are rare, that are basically imitable, they're not imitable, and they're basically organized. So all these things basically lead to the creation of a competitive advantage, right? And HR can basically contribute by creating a high performance culture, by establishing best of industry people practices, right? But also contribute to the VRIO, that is valuable, rare, inimitable, and organized capabilities through selective hiring, and providing state of art skill building trainings, right? And effective performance management processes as well. So in order to have unique resources, and in order to build their capabilities, these are the things that the HR needs to focus on. Now, number second is when it comes to key drivers, there's efficient processes and organization. So the HR can also contribute to efficient internal processes, and smooth organizational operations, by basically guaranteeing continuity of business through low absence and turnover rate, and these are things that HR directly controls, right? So the effective recruitment, and timely deployment of the workforce, these are all the things that an HR looks after. And this is basically something that shows how people practices and workforce capabilities basically contribute to the organizational effectiveness, right? And obviously through these things you can also measure how effective your organization is, because obviously if the turnover rate is high, that means maybe there's some lacking in the people's practices, or the workforce capabilities, right? So also another key contribution is that creation of synergies through integrated HR practices. That is something very, very important. So if you want the processes to be efficient, and if you want your organization to be efficient, one contribution that HR can make is basically they need to have integrated HR practices, so that it creates synergy around the culture, and around their core competencies, because this in turn will actually reflect the strategic requirements of the business. Now if we come towards the third key driver, that is product and service outputs. So the main contribution HR can make here is through their business acumen, right? So the HR should ensure that its policies benefit the organizations and customers. That is very important. And obviously through culture building and communicating the values, they align the organization with its customers. And through obviously upskilling, rewarding, evaluating those values, they need to make sure that their employees are also on the same page when it comes to satisfying the customers, and aligning the organization with the customers. So any organization in the service sector should, like for example, have a clear customer oriented strategy and culture. And all the HR strategies, that they should align with those strategies and that culture, in order for any organization to be effective. Now, coming to organizational objectives, right? So this is basically the area where HR has the least direct input, we can say. However, HR can still provide an invaluable contribution to these objectives by basically acing its HR practices, by building the workforce capabilities, and by adding the organization's key performance drivers. So let's say examples of organizations objectives are creation of more traditional shareholder value. That is basically, they can create value for their stakeholders, that is their employees, their contractors, their suppliers, the communities in which they're working. So they can basically do that as well. And they can also do that by creating societal value, that is by creating positive social change, or a better and a cleaner environment, or a healthier society. So these are the kind of objectives that organizations need to have. And the HR can contribute to that as well, by making the best use of their HR practices, and using those HR practices in a way that helps building the workforce capabilities, in order to be in alignment with those organizational objectives. So basically this was basically the whole way in which the HR can contribute towards the organizational effectiveness. Because when it comes to HR is the building block of any organization. And any organization cannot function without HR, and this is how HR can actually contribute towards organizational effectiveness as well.